Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Love on Campus acknowledges the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the Adelaide Plains, land never ceded. We pay our respects to elders past and present and recognise the rich living traditions of storytelling and knowledge of this country. We also extend respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait and First Nations, recognising the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Love on Campus. We are in another rotation of our structure for this podcast, and this month we are looking at, for the Regis Rule, Society Defined, second, Bucket List Romance, third, The Grumpy Sunshine, and then the book club at the end of the month is Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I forgot to introduce the people I'm here with.
That's okay. That was a really good introduction to the rotation. Now you can introduce us.
Strong intro on the rotation.
I'm here with Dr. Amy Matthews.
Hello.
And Kathleen Stanley.
Hello.
And we're talking today about the Regis Rule, Society Defined. It is the big first one. It is the first one. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, because we're doing it all out of order. We went to endings first,
Yes.
and then point of ritual death, and now we're going back to society.
Right to the beginning.
Where it all begins.
Now, I'll start by reading out a definition of society defined, or how,
According to Regis.
how Regis describes it.
So these are the rules that Regis defines romance fiction by.
Mm-hmm.
They're essential elements.
Yeah, you have to have these to be considered a romance.
So, society defined is near the beginning of the novel, the society that the heroine and hero will confront in their courtship is defined for the reader. The society is in some way flawed, which I noted down beside it, as all societies really are. I've never seen a perfect one.
I like how you've annotated her. You're like, I just had some annotations.
Just had to say it. It may be incomplete, superannuated, which for those who also didn't know what that meant, like me, means outdated, or corrupt.
Oh my God, that makes superannuation seem so sad. Like,
yeah,
you're
I know, that's what
outdated
I was
now. Here's
thinking.
some money, go out
That's
to
what I was-
pasture.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like,
That's dark.
such an interesting word to use for superannuation. And then it always oppresses the heroine and hero.
That's the bit I really like about this definition. Because again, like with Regis, I think it can get a bit histrionic sometimes, like point of ritual death. When then as writers we go, well, we'll call it the black moment. Mm-hmm. But it's true that you always introduce the hero and heroine in a context where they are struggling in some way or oppressed in some way or not happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
I saw Robert McKee once. He's a story consultant, and people have mixed feelings on him. If you've ever seen the movie Adaptation, has anyone seen that with Nicolas Cage?
No.
Oh, it's a Charlie Kaufman film. And it's just so fabulous. If you're a writer, you should definitely watch this film. And it's about how Charlie Kaufman took on the job of trying to turn Susan Orlean's book, The Orchid Thief, which is a non-fiction book. It was on all the bestseller lists, into a film. And actually the film turns into Charlie Kaufman is a character in the book, and he's got a twin brother, which he doesn't have in real life. And Charlie Kaufman, the screenwriter, is trying to turn this into a film and failing all the way through the film. So it's really meta. And he goes to a Robert McKee story workshop.
I was going to say, I was like, wait, this is a guy who's writing a movie about a guy writing a movie.
Yeah. Who then goes to the story workshop in the movie and has an actor play Robert McKee. And Robert McKee gives his story consult and says, here are the 3 things you should never do. And then the rest of the film does all 3 things. It's so good. But anyway, I went to see the actual Robert McKee, who features in this movie, who's really famous in script consulting and story doctoring and stuff. And he was talking about how when you first introduce a character, you need to see what they lack. And he was using the film The Bridges of Madison County, which some people like to call a romance but isn't. It's a love story. It's got a really sad ending. But he was talking about when you introduce the Meryl Streep character at the beginning, she's this housewife in the Midwest in I think it's the 60s, and her family's all going off to the fair, and she's staying home. She's this Italian housewife, and
Meryl Streep playing Italian.
Yeah, of course. But what you see is she's invisible to her family. Like she puts the breakfast on the table. No one kind of looks up. She's like this housewife ghost of the house. So then when Clint Eastwood turns up and he falls madly in love with her, you just feel her need for that. You are so like, even though it's kind of an affair and you shouldn't be down with it because she's married, you see how hungry she is for someone to look at her.
And you can accept the affair because the society she's from
is flawed.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's getting us back to society. Well done. But it's always about they are somehow oppressed or hurt or neglected or ignored by the society they live in when we meet them.
Cool.
Very interesting. Well, I think a good example of very definite societies and the way that they oppress characters is obviously in historical romances. That's sort of
definitely.
That's what Regis bases her structure on. She bases it on Pride and Prejudice.
Basically, we're always going to be saying it in that tone because we're like, every time we get to Regis, we have to go back to Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah.
Like no other romance novel was ever written.
And it's literally as the literary person in the pod, I don't know why literary people do this. Like, why do we always go back to this? Is an argument in the Academy itself. You're either I think a classics kind of person who will
or a pop culture person.
Yeah. Or I like to think of you or as everything else because I'm like, there's those of us who will read anything, touch anything, and we'll still use the classics, but we don't.
But the classics were also pop culture of their era.
Yeah, like oh my God, Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice was considered like fluffy stuff.
Silly books for women.
Silly fluffy stuff. and like, do you think people
rotting
are
women's brains
do you
with
think
these
maybe
books?
the thing with Pride and Prejudice is still to this day they're like, whoa, like a woman wrote this really good book and it talks about so much stuff and it's romance.
Otherwise they had to change their names. Looking at you, George Eliot.
Yeah, that's right.
Who is it? What were the Brontes?
Emily, Charlotte.
Acton Bell.
Oh, the Bells, yeah.
Acton Bell and whatever it is. But yeah, so the idea that the historical romance is often carefully drawn and its unfamiliar principles explained. And so I gave a lecture a few weeks ago about all the aspects of Regis's rules and things like that. And I used a Julia Quinn novel, An Offer from a Gentleman, which is
one of the Bridgerton books.
One of the Bridgerton books. It's the third one.
That's Benedict, right?
It's Benedict, of course. Let it be known I love Benedict.
George is in Team Benedict. Hold on, just pause there. What team are you on, Kathleen?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I'm not on a team.
You're not on a team?
I'm on Team Daphne, if anything. Like
I'm
not on the men's teams.
But I also Eloise is my favourite.
Oh yeah. Oh, love Eloise. But like, if I had to couple up with one of them,
Anthony. I would be Team Anthony.
You're an Anthony?
Yeah. Well, the last season I thought he was so good.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'd still be Team Daphne. I don't find the men super attractive. You know what? Queen Charlotte. I maybe would be King George.
King George.
I honestly am like, I really enjoy them aesthetically with what they're doing and who they're with, but not. I don't place myself in there. Like I love the women. I just love the women in that show.
I'm so self-insert. It's bad.
I like Eloise.
I love Eloise.
It's a genre where it's designed to be self-insert.
Yeah. But I think I like Benedict also because he has a really good relationship with Eloise in the TV show.
Oh my God, when they sit on the swings.
Yeah, when they sit on the swings, like they're really sweet and they're really funny to each other as well. Like they're always taking digs at one another. So I love Eloise as well.
I think you're drawn to the artist types.
Yes, I love artist types. I love snarky side, like snarky characters as well.
So
characters
you
always making jokes.
You used Dreamy Benedict to go through Regis.
Yes, I did. I used him to go through Regis because in his book, spoilers for anyone who doesn't want to know what Benedict's season will sort of look like, although who knows?
They'll probably TV.
Yeah. It's like literal different social classes. So he is of the ton, the whole upper class of British London society, and then she is a bastard, and she is sort of relegated to being a maid.
Yeah, she's like a servant.
She's a servant, but she's like the daughter of a
It's such a good book
upperclassman.
because
It's really good.
It's basically Cinderella.
Yeah, it's basically Cinderella, which is also awesome.
It's so funny
so
because
cool.
this is the book that made me stop reading them.
Yeah. Well, it's the only book I'll be honest, it's the only Bridgerton I've read.
I'm like, I read the first 3. I hit this book, and afterwards I was like, yeah, I'm done.
Why? What was it about it?
I don't know. I just was
Is
like,
it that
it's
you
the
didn't
same.
like
I
this
think
one?
it might be a little bit of the same book.
Yeah.
But I also feel like the Cinderella story, I think I actually didn't like that element.
It is a little bit overdone, I'll be honest,
Yeah.
the Cinderella thing. But is it because you didn't like the Benedict book, or is it because you didn't want to read the Colin one?
No, I honestly do want to. Like, I don't like Colin in the TV show, but I don't have a problem with Colin in the book. I just think I got to that point and was like, these just feel a bit tired
Yeah.
now.
I think though they are a very familiar pleasure. Like people who read
Yeah.
the Bridgerton books want the same from
Yeah,
it.
they want
like,
that
I think I needed a
historical thing
break.
constantly.
I think it was
Yeah.
more that I needed a break, and I think it was just when for me when it was like, oh, now we're doing classism. I was like, oh no, I don't know if I feel this.
Well, to be fair, people who read historical romances, I feel like part of the draw to them is the societal structure of it.
Absolutely.
The
yeah.
expectation. Like I
Yeah.
know a lot of people, like Pride and Prejudice, the 2005. It's 2005, the Matthew McFadden one, right? People love it because there's part of you being like, and people love Bridgerton, I think, because there's part of it that's like, where you like go to a ball and a guy asks you to dance and you sort of know what's happening. Like
I think there are rules. Like
Yeah, there's
I think,
rules. That's
I think the
helpful.
fantasy of it is there's
Yeah.
a rule of how you approach a lady when you talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of taking a turn around the drawing room.
Yeah.
It's not like the free for all that we currently live in.
Which is so unsettling.
Yeah, but also
Yeah.
and the attraction of like I get to dress up really nice and go
Yeah.
to this place, and he'll say, "Would you like a drink?" and "Would you like a walk in the garden?"
Yeah,
and maybe
they're like
have a dance
courteous and
actually practice conversation.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the Benedict one too shines a light so much on how you couldn't do a reverse Cinderella in Regency without it being too it just.
Oh, please, someone do it now.
Reverse,
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my
I
God,
would-
reverse
that-
Cinderella.
Write in and tell us if you've read one. We
that
would
to
like
me
to read it.
that's what I would want to read.
so
That's the version.
interesting.
I don't find this version of it doesn't feel.
I'm really
like, of
curious
course
to
the
see
man got to just bring her up into
Yeah, up
society,
into
and
society, what
of
would
course
happen?
I was like, it doesn't challenge much for me.
It's very
That's
hard to
true.
challenge the past, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I was like, the beautiful thing about romance and fiction is we can kind of do whatever the hell we want.
Well, that's why I think the Bridgerton TV series is great.
Yeah.
Like, it is taking it and running
Well,
with it.
I was thinking about how they might do it in the Bridgerton TV series because Benedict's book is very central to class and how she's lower class and he's upper class and things like that. And they sort
And
of
particularly with Benedict, because he has the privilege to go, I'm going to be an artist.
yeah, and there's like
There's so
also
much.
the-
I think
the
Benedict
race
is too
dynamic
privilegey
now.
for me, maybe.
But there's also like the race dynamic now with the TV series, like what and they sort of explain how how they came to integrate and all that sort of stuff in
Which I kind of
Baton,
thought was,
in the
I get why they're doing it.
Yeah,
and I think
Queen
Queen Charlotte does it well.
yeah, it does.
But in a way, what was great about it was it gives access to a fantasy space.
Yeah, that
'Cause
is
this isn't actual history in any way, shape,
yeah,
or
like
form.
would we have preferred if they didn't touch on it at all and it was just fully integrated, or do we
I don't know,
like the
'cause
fact that they consider it?
I think we're not the target audience for that.
No, we're not.
And I don't think that they really, until Queen Charlotte, I don't know how much
They
it
didn't
was.
explain it,
I think
really.
it was actually just
there was
scenes.
a reference in
With the first
season
season
one with
with
Lady
Simon
Danbury
and-
and
Yeah.
Simon, and
Like
she
that he
says,
needs to
there's
do
a
it.
lot of pressure on us.
Yeah.
To like fulfill the role of
Yeah.
of the rest of the ton and do it in the same way.
And like you said, Amy, it's not really for us to say, but what I liked about that element was that it touched on it, but also didn't make it about
wasn't
race.
central- it wasn't about it.
It was about people, like you said, that fantasy space of everyone just coexisting.
And like
which
we're,
is, you know,
like
that's
we're
very
creating,
privileged,
and
isn't
it is this feeling though of like we create this fantasy space, and we can choose to reinscribe in the fantasy space the exclusions that exist in the real life that comes from historical gross events, or we can look to open up the, like, if you can imagine it in the fantasy space, you can imagine it in reality.
Yeah. So I was thinking about like how will they do that with Benedict in the TV series, because I'm like, do they then bring the race aspect into it with his coupling? Do they disregard it? Do they, because there's that class aspects. And I
Yeah.
suppose the idea is that class historically was also a divider of race. And
Well,
so I wonder how that would then work.
I thought it was really great in Queen Charlotte in the episode where where she's meeting where Lady Danbury is meeting the Queen,
yeah.
like the Queen Dowager, Dowager Princess, I think she's in that.
Yeah.
And she says, you know, what do you want money? And she's like, I have money.
Yeah.
And it's this thing of, I think one of the major critiques, you know, there's a lot of post-colonial critique of Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, that whole era of 19th century fiction, of it being invisible to the origins of the wealth.
Yeah.
That the wealth is coming from the colonies, it's coming from India, it's coming from First Nations countries
Actually,
like
they
the
do
United
that
States
really
and
well
Australia.
in Queen Charlotte, because she talks about how in their country of origin, I can't remember where
Sierra
it is.
Leone, I
Yeah,
think it
Sierra
is.
Leone. They're literally like royalty.
Yeah,
They're
a lot
literally royalty.
A lot of them are royalty. They talk about that all
Yeah.
the time. How
How that's disregarded in London society.
yeah.
But I think, I mean, this is why I don't write Regency, is that the fantasy of it. I mean, this is where Bridgerton, the TV series, is doing radically great work, and go Julia Quinn for being part of it as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That it is constantly reinscribing something that's pretty awful. I mean, I am too. I'm in a Western space, and I'm very aware of that as I write and try and recognize First Nations of the places and to acknowledge the damage being done by colonialism. But as we write these fantasy spaces, and I don't do it perfectly, I screw up all the time.
I don't think there is a perfect way to do it.
No.
Just as a
So, but we are reinscribing what we're desiring is something that is oppressing other people. And same with gender. Like, I think why the Regency is so powerful as a fantasy space is the gender inequities are so clear that you can engage with them really openly.
Like the idea of the man
the idea
disregarding
that your ownership-
aspects of the patriarchy in pursuit of love
and
or
the
relationship.
dangers of sex. I think the danger of the emotional dangers of sex and the danger of pregnancy, the economic,
it's like a big.
the economic system of sex and marriage. I think is just so clear.
They talk about that a bit in actually the Benedict book, because she doesn't want to have sex with him because she's a bastard. It's dangerous, and she's a bastard, and she's like, well, I'm not going to do that and then have a child,
and it's
in
still
the same
dangerous.
social situation.
Like, you look at what's happening now with the repealing of abortion in the United States, and you know, in Australia, abortion has been very tricky too, and we've only just had everything legalised here in South Australia. That it's really dangerous for a woman.
Yeah. They need to be, specifically in historicals and regencies, so considerate of those. Well, actually, I don't know what I'm saying here.
Well, they have the conversation head on, right?
Yeah, they do. They have to she is constantly, this is kind of a pitfall of that book, is that Benedict's always like, come on, be my mistress, like, let's have sex, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, like I am a servant and that means that if I got pregnant, my child will be a bastard, and I don't want to do that. And then also it just will re-emphasize her position. Like,
I think that's what irritates me a little bit about it, is that from a society perspective, he's really fine reinscribing the society he's from until he can't get what he wants.
Yeah, that's true. He's constantly like, come on, what's wrong with being a mistress? And she's like, lots.
Says from the white man of privilege who can do whatever he wants, who's an artist, who has no worries in the world. Like,
probably the only worry he has is he's a younger son.
Yeah, he's that. They do talk about that a bit, where they're like,
sorry if I don't sympathize too much.
Yeah,
but
he's like,
seriously,
oh no.
if you were like the fifth son, like if you were Gregory in that family,
you wouldn't give it.
They didn't often inherit much because they want to keep the assets.
Oh no,
together.
they might have to go and work and earn money
Exactly,
like everyone else.
but they're not set up to do that.
No. Well, also, like, Benedict
It's not
is
like
like
it's going to be
independently
that
wealthy
hard
as
for him
well.
to go in. It's not that hard
In
for
the
them
book,
to go out.
he's established as independently wealthy. Like, he has his own
Oh,
cottage and he
yeah,
has
'cause
his
that's
own
the
place in
fantasy.
London. Yeah, like he is independently wealthy. He's the second son, but Anthony's given him some cash. And
he's gone and invested it wisely, and it's so
know.
easy for him, and he can still go get a job, and he can still work, and he'll get it before anybody else. And I'm like, this whole idea of, I'm sorry, I can't. Like, it's just a little bit too far of a stretch for me to get on board, because I'm just like, well, you're not challenging society at all, because you only did it to get what you want. And then what have you done afterwards? Like, oh, what? Look, I'll walk around with her. I'm so proud of myself.
Yeah,
I'll pat myself on the back because I raised
happens.
one maid up from the sludge. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
Now hire another maid to replace her.
Yeah.
Now don't exploit other servants or something like that. Like,
It's just
you know,
like,
think
alrighty.
about how you
Class is still in place though.
Yeah.
We come to the end and nothing has shifted. Like, and one
She's
of the
just
things
simply
about
being brought up into it.
And one of the things that Regis tries to imply is that society needs to have changed and been remedied by the end. But I'm like, society does not change. I'm sorry. It just changes for one woman. And even then, she's still a woman stuck in this thing. And like the rest of society, the rest of the ton are not going to be like, oh yeah, you were always one of us. Like they're always going to be assholes to her.
Well, if we think about society defining in Happy Place,
Yep.
and how she feels oppressed by this like need to achieve and be successful.
Which I think in a Western, like say United States, UK, Europe, Australia, like Eurocentric, white middle class context, I think is a huge pressure.
Yeah, and this like need to capitalize on things that you enjoy, and this idea to
And I will flag, they're not all white, but they're all middle class to upper class.
But this idea to, maintain your social standing, or at least improve on it, if you will, like
Or
economically.
and the idea that career is identity.
Yeah.
Which you talked about last time, Kathleen.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that Emily Henry's book does sort of remedy that, in that she does say in Happy Place, it's okay to not end up with, to be this highly achieving, all figured out person. I think that sort of remedies to a certain extent. It makes me feel comfortable, like a sense of comfort when I do read it. And there's this sort of idea that it's okay to not have it all figured out. So I do think that in terms of like when you say that the book at the end, the heroine and hero are sort of challenging or something's changing, I think that they sort of do in Emily Henry books.
The only thing I would
society
flag,
there is personal. The society there is very personal versus the society of an entire class
the
system.
the entire class system. That's true.
The only thing there though is that and this is like one of the criticisms I guess that gets leveled against the genre, is it's a very heteronormative partnering up. Like you can only do it because you're with someone who's also paying. Like he's earning a lot of money from his furniture business, so she can do pottery, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's the feminist critique of it, really, isn't it?
That's
the
the fantasy imagination of it too. Like, we're gonna have to project privilege,
economic stability.
Because otherwise it's too hard to
work.
imagine
Well,
it.
that's
It's
probably
not
why
romantic.
that's probably why billionaire romances
Well,
are
I was
so
going to
popular.
say that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think,
Like,
and I
you're
didn't.
economically safe, so everything else can be a challenge.
And isn't that a societal issue, especially for women? I
Absolutely.
mean, for everyone. But
Do you know that gets criticised a lot? Like even going back to Bride and Bridges, even Elizabeth, like being impressed by Pemberley when she goes there. But also there's a whole category romance industry featuring princes and sheiks and billionaires, and those code words are actually in the titles. And
do they have billionaire women ones?
well, I think, but this is
I
the
know.
fantasy though, and I didn't get it for a long time. Like as a feminist, I was like, oh my God, like all the criticism is, we're just reinforcing that.
Yeah.
But actually it goes back to what you talk about a lot, Kathleen, about labour, that I got it when I was a single mother working full time with two very young children, and I was exhausted, and money was always tight, and there were no luxuries, and there was no one like kind of.
That's when it's comforting. And
I remember 11 p.m. at night doing the laundry after I'd finished my marking, after I'd put the kids to bed, like crying and doing the laundry, knowing I had to get up at 5:30 the next morning, and the fantasy of then finding a billionaire who sweeps in, who's gorgeous, who's like, let me take you to Paris and here's some champagne and you don't have to do anything today.
And in real life, a woman who desires that is called a gold digger.
Yeah. So, but
instead of her just being somebody who's so screwed over by society,
like she wants some sort of just like Just like an
Just give
independent
me an
remedy
effing
to
break.
it. Yeah.
So then I think going back to thinking about these as cultural conversations,
Yeah.
what we see in fantasy is reflected a need, a desire, like that wound.
Mhm.
So if you're seeing a bunch of romance fantasies that are about billionaires whisking you away and solving all your problems, that speaks to an economic wounding of women,
Hugely.
I think. Rather than critiquing the individual women for reading these things, I think it's worth thinking, why is this a
Why are
fantasy?
they reading
Agreed.
them? Yeah. Well, I mean, 50 Shades of Grey is the ultimate, is like the most popular.
Surrendering of all control.
Yeah. Like,
You know what? I actually remembered a billionaire one where it's the woman.
oh, you did? That's
and it's
good.
on our roster for a book club later
Oh, it
on
is?
down the track. Yes, it is. It's one of our books later on
When
down
is
the
it?
track, which because no one listening knows our full book club, I will tell you guys off air because I'm the only one who's read it. So no, but there is a billionaire woman one where they do a reverse and the
This
state of
makes me feel
society.
tired, the thought of being a billionaire woman and working
Yeah.
really
Oh
hard.
my god, yeah, it does. It's also kind of nice to like. I suppose the thing about the billionaire man thing is that you're like, so like you don't have to do any of the labor.
Okay, do I have
like
to do the
he's-
tax?
Like he doesn't have to.
pay the
Like he's
tax bill.
doing it. Like, and also I feel like that's such a big like intrigue. If I'm going to speak from a generational perspective, I think a lot of women my age and also just people my age like the idea of entering into a partnership where the other person is the hard worker, the laborer, and then you can you sort of and you know what, I as a feminist I don't agree with that because I know that it's really important for women to be financially independent just from like even just from like financial abuse situation, but it does there's this sort of draw to the idea that, you know, in the future maybe I will marry someone who or be with someone who's financially successful, and then that takes a burden off me.
I think
And
particularly.
remember that women are doing a lot of unpaid labour all the time in a domestic setting.
Well, but
So-
I also think there is an element of if you are a cis het woman or someone with a uterus who's having children, if you're a person who's getting pregnant and going through childbirth and having those couple months of recovery afterwards,
Yeah.
the thought of having to be solely financially responsible is quite stressful.
Yeah. And as you were saying, Kathleen, like the emotional labour that women take on anyway,
Yeah.
especially in domestic scenarios.
Women have
There's like
always
an
been
idea-
workers. They just haven't always been paid for it.
Yeah, and it's a labour that's not necessarily valued in society. Like it's seen as like a
So it's
different
not-
And I
labour.
actually wanted to just quickly, before we move too far away from it, the book that I'm flagging for later on, where it's a woman billionaire, the entire tone is different. There is an entire tone different. And what she desires is not necessarily to stay being the rich, whatever woman. It's about going to a small town and actually wanting less and wanting a man who's not from that world and wanting, because the pressures and the what she feels and what she experiences in the world where she has to be the girl boss and she has to be all of these things, and hers is partly inherited, like it's her family that's rich and she works for her family, but it's the pressures there, those are the things that are really highly relevant that are being spoken about that I think differ a little bit from the male billionaire ones. Not to say that they don't, you know.
I'd be really curious to think too about masculinity in these spaces too, about why men don't fantasize about billionaire women sweeping
or
them off.
successful women. Do you know what recently? Oh my God. Because I
mean, some do, obviously,
Yeah.
but I mean in mass culture.
Yeah.
I think my husband would be really fine if I was the billionaire.
Yeah, some of them are fine, but like
He'd love to not work.
I've been, you know, those like horrible podcasts where it's like men and they get women in to just essentially like try and absolutely diminish them, and there are these men who are talking about like masculine energy and being a man, and they're
we all know
you
who
know-
you're talking about right now.
well, yes, we know the specific guy, we know that, but there's like this other one that's absolutely horrible at the moment, and the entire premise of the podcast is he brings in mainly sex workers, right? These like OnlyFans women who do OnlyFans, and he just brings
giant
them in
sigh.
to essentially just shame them constantly about their like why they choose to be on OnlyFans. But I was thinking about how women on OnlyFans who choose to be on OnlyFans, they make a lot of money. Like they do make a lot of money, and there's something entirely
Because of the guys who go and pay
who
them.
go and pay for it. Yeah, exactly. And there's like something so threatening about
At least they're
a
making money
woman-
on it.
Yeah, exactly. A woman monetizing something for something like and making a lot of money money for something that these men also shame
Like
them
Kim
for.
Kardashian, right?
Yeah, so they're like, you're making all this money, and that's emasculating to a certain to certain types
But
of
I
men.
think, when you say, Kathleen, your husband would be glad to be at home, I would be curious, because I have been a primary breadwinner before, and I have a lot of friends who are primary breadwinners, and the male partners get, ridiculed, teased.
Yeah,
I actually think 10 years ago he might not have. 10 years ago, when we were in a very different place in our life and he was in a different environment working in the military, I actually think he would have struggled with it. Not because I don't think he personally, but I think you're right. I think society would have made it really hard for him.
It is, I think, really hard.
But I think now, even if society did make it hard for him, the one thing that he's grown so much as a person, which I'm going to sound like I'm doing the gushing wife thing here, but my husband has worked really hard on himself, and the wonderful thing about that I think that I've noticed about his progress in the decade we've been together is that he no longer is so worried about that, because he's so aware of his privilege that it's a privilege to turn around, and he would turn around and be like, well, I don't really care what any of these people who haven't evolved to this place, like they're still back in that toxic place I'm not in anymore. And it takes a lot of strength to do that.
A very strong self-esteem, I think, which
they
a lot of men are not raised to have.
They move away from this idea that their masculinity is inherently tied to being a provider or a breadwinner or anything like that, and therefore they just don't. There's nothing in masculinity.
I think his thing is that if we were rich enough and it was me making all the money, he would just find new friends. He'd be like, I don't care. I wouldn't even talk to any of these people. He's like, we would be so set. Like, we're obviously talking about not a breadwinner in a staying in the same maybe sense of where we are now. But I'm talking high fantasy here. I know he would definitely just be like, if I could just stay home all day and raise the kids and not all that, I wouldn't give a crap what anyone thought, because he considers that work, and he would just be like so happy to be doing what he wanted because he hates his job.
Not many people do consider.
It's such hard work. It's 24/7 hard work.
Well, I've been tutoring tutoring at my old school, and they have to write an essay on the play A Doll's House.
Yeah, we did that in year 12.
Yeah, I did it in year 12 too.
So did I. Guys, did we just find a generational crossover?
But like the entire purpose of that, one of the girls was saying, I don't like Nora. And I was like, but you're kind of, Nora's a product of her
time and place.
And her society. Like, she is immature, and she is really sort of,
she gets rewarded for being
like that's the entire purpose of her. Like, she's sort of fulfilling her role at the beginning is the idea. But then the idea is that in like Germany, they hated the ending where she becomes, self-actualized and independent.
There's two endings, right?
Yeah, there's two endings. And Germany was like, no, you need to change that. She can't leave her children, and that can't happen.
Have you guys read Anna Karenina?
Did my comparative on it. I did a Doll's House and Anna Karenina comparative.
That was, talking about society. If you've got like the Benedict Bridgerton romance version, Anna Karenina is the real life version.
Yeah,
of
that's what happens
when you violate society's rules in those contexts.
And can I just say, actually, talking about students and their reactions to that, I've noticed more and more that when we look back, a lot of students just immediately reject these books because they don't want to think and step back in time to those places. Like I remember we did, in my honours year, we did The Princess Bride.
Yep.
And some of us were like, The Princess Bride, great. And we really enjoyed it. And so many people were like, how could you enjoy this? It's so problematic.
The film or the book?
Both. It was a compare.
Because the book is so quirky.
Yeah. And I thought the book was great and the film was great. But of course it's got problems. But, you're looking at it as a product of the time and what was going on in the moment.
I'm always saying that to our students, like you've got to think of the contextual moment.
And the amount of them that can't do that. And I do find that that's part of the reason why it's still why we have to keep revisiting it. Because if you're going to keep ignoring what was going on at those times, you can't, how can you possibly understand why people are still angry or why we're still having these issues or why these are still discussions?
So as you guys are talking then, why is Pride and Prejudice so enduring? Because as you're saying that about The Princess Bride, the thing is fantasies are often very specific to the era, and the ones that are really of the moment are things like the Harlequin Mills and Boone, because they are so mass produced by the month that they date really quickly.
Yeah.
So if you go back and read a 60s Mills and Boon or a 70s Mills and Boon or one from 1984 or one from 2 years ago, they are so dated immediately. So the fantasy reflects the current moment.
You ask why the rape fantasy was really big in, 70s,
I really think it's tied to second wave feminism.
Hugely. And if I think about maybe why Pride and Prejudice is so enduring is maybe it's because the entire sort of purpose of the book is to explore the impact of prejudicial beliefs and the impact of being prideful.
Misunderstanding each other.
Yeah, and that's still a problem. People are still entirely prejudicial. People are still too prideful.
I think it also shows that people who don't think they like romance would fucking love romance.
Oh, yeah. Do you want a story about? Do you want a story about my dad?
Sorry about the swearing.
I think Pride and Prejudice doesn't feel romantic the way that romance books do now.
Oh, it's just the way it's written, though. I would almost say as well. But my dad, his entire life did not read any Jane Austen. He was like, not reading that girly stuff. That's not, he was a big history reader, only read history. So this is probably one of the reasons he likes Pride and Prejudice. But he then he passed away, and 2 years before he died, he read it for the first time. Read it. Favorite book he has ever read in his entire life. I'm not kidding. He spoke about it to anyone who would listen.
It's like Dickens. It's when you finally get to those, you're like, this is why they're famous.
It was his favorite book of all time, and he was he very confidently would say, best book I've ever read.
Wow.
And it's and you spent your whole life staying away from it because you had this preconception of who would read it and what it might be about, and at the end of the day.
And then when you discover the actual access points that get people in, they realise that.
And he's, I think the draw to it also, he really liked the father character in it and Elizabeth's father, which, obvious reasons that he identified with that. But I think that he just enjoyed the way that it explored the society at the time as well and the things that it was talking about. And he used to say that it's still so relevant.
I also wonder if it's a little bit of a thing with so Pride and Prejudice is bread and butter and gin and tonic, and some of those 60s and 70s Harlequins that you're talking about are Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Do you know what I'm saying? Like from the last episode,
Yeah, I'm like, you get what I'm saying, right?
It's a simile that makes sense enduringly.
Moment. Yeah.
If you're listening to this podcast, you're going to get used to me doing these kind of things.
Yeah,
because it becomes ahistorical by being so rooted in a past time and place.
It's something that feels like it's always been and it always had to have happened and always had to go together versus something that feels very pop culture or something that's very of the moment.
There will be some books that people will pick up in 100 years from now that will be like that.
Enduring.
Yeah.
And we won't know what they are. We guess and think and we will have no idea and we'll get it wrong.
Normal people might. I could maybe pick that out as
but I can tell you, I bet you
have an argument about.
I'm not calling it a romance. I'm not calling it a romance. But if we're just thinking about enduring texts, I think that would be an enduring
It's weird what leaps out. The fact Dirty Dancing as a movie has endured for so long is fascinating to me because it's just a little romance.
I know it is. It's a good one.
I don't like it.
I know, I love it.
I love it too.
Georgia, it's going to be on at the cinema soon if you want to go.
Oh, really? I went and saw it at the Moonlight Cinema.
Oh.
And I saw some people that I know there and these two guys, and they'd never seen it before, and they'd gone together on what was essentially a bro date. And they'd gone to watch the movie together. They had wine. They were going, and we were like, "Have you guys seen it before? Are you excited?" And they were like, "Never seen it." And we were like, "What? Are you kidding me? It's going to be amazing." And when we were watching it, this is the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. A dad and his daughter were watching it right up the front, and because it was on grass during the lift scene, you know what I was saying. The dad and the daughter did the full lift. It was the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. Talking about enduring moments, that's inspiring a dad and daughter, 40 years after it's come out to do a little lift at the movie cinema. Sorry, that's a really good story. I forgot about that.
Well, I thought maybe now, I just made a note last night that maybe we could just touch base on the study. So we talked about Happy Place, but Love on the Brain, what about that one? That was our first month book.
Society of what? Well, I think the academic
society.
Is a kind of society.
I think it's women in STEM.
Yeah,
right?
it's women in STEM. I was going to say it's specifically the sexism in academia.
I would like to just flag too that I've always considered society to be partial and influenced by the actual society, as in the physical place.
Yeah.
Which is where a lot of my work crosses over. So, you know, because the elements of a small town versus a city or certain countries and cultures are going to highly reflect what you get and expect from a society in a book.
Well, if you're like writing something set in Paris, I think that we sort of associate Paris with different sexual dynamics socially. I would
also even just talking about Love in the Brain.
Like French New Wave film, is that what you're saying?
I also am talking
New York Herald Tribune.
Yeah, and I think they also have a casualness to it about it, and like an approach to it that's like flirting. So second nature to French people, I think, and that feels like a
Italian and French.
Italian and French.
Yeah,
I love it.
Flirting.
I love it. Can't wait.
But Love on the Brain, the Society of NASA.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the society of the place of what's there and who has access and who's going to be there. And, you know, that influences a lot of what our expectations are going in. Like, you don't really have to, she doesn't have to explain it's going to be a bro fest, right? We know that.
Sausage fest.
Yeah, sausage fest, sorry.
Like this, it has an implied.
There's an implication. Yeah. She goes into it and she talks about it.
Yeah.
But it's not a surprise. It's something that just saying she's going to work at NASA, we know what we're in for. Like, that society is predetermined based on the time the book is set in.
And then going back to your Dirty Dancing, which we just talked about, that is so much of the society of the time, right?
Yeah, because he's like the labourer who comes and works there for the summer.
He's a WASP labourer in a upper-class Jewish summer camp. And then you've got the issue of abortion, which is also there. There's a lot of feminist issues going on in that film.
Yeah, that was do you know what was also interesting is that with the abortion in that film is that she's not ridiculed for wanting it.
There's no judgment.
No, there's no judgment. They're like, she can't have it. Like,
it was 1988. Different time.
It makes complete sense that she, in her state, in her like economic state, social state, like all of that, wouldn't want to have a child. And she gets it, and no one's judging her.
Yeah, the film doesn't judge her.
Yeah, baby's dad kinda, but not really.
No, he's judging Johnny.
He's not even judging her. He goes, you know what? Just here to provide care.
He basically says I think the line is, what kind of man would take his partner to a butcher?
Yeah. God, I'm remembering now. Yeah. So even he's not judging. He's like the older generation in it. Like you would like that.
And that's so an interesting case of like that reflecting 1988 rather than 1960, whatever the film said it.
Yeah. And also just like so contradictory to how abortion would be talked about and discussed
and
even nowadays.
Another film we referenced in a recent episode was The Happiest Season, that Kristen Stewart movie.
Yeah.
That's so much about that family in that town and the whole coming out. You know, Aubrey Plaza as well, like was kept in the closet as the woman's girlfriend beforehand.
Yeah, because that's a fairly small, like I actually use that in my thesis. It's a small town. I would make the argument they go back to a small town. And because they don't have to be in the closet while they're in the city.
Yeah.
And the minute she goes back to her family in the small town and he's running for political, which is another societal. Yeah. Like there's all these elements that make her go, I can't come out.
And the parents' marriage, there's a lot in that actually around those small communities as a society. Because I think you're right, we're thinking macro often here, and you're right, Kathleen, that sometimes it's the micro level is the society.
Yeah, well, society is just a multitude of things, including the places. And like these ideas, like that's for me, like the small town in particular has a lot of dimension, but also you shift that to a different genre and you're doing something else and you're making different statements. So romance, like I think we were talking about off recording, how, the small town can be, so romantic. Maybe it was in a pod. Now I'm like, wait,
we can't.
It's all blending together.
But we just never stop talking.
Yeah, exactly.
We actually have trouble with sometimes starting the recording because
we're so busy talking.
Yeah, we're like, wait, this should be on air. That was why we did this, because everyone told us put it on air.
I know.
So like the small town in a romance. No, I think it was a pod. It's got these elements of romanticism that aren't real to a society of small town in reality, and the hardships, because I think we talked about how in Emily Henry's book Lovers, it's actually still quite a run down town with a lot of money problems and all these things, but there's a romanticism to them, which kind of is I think, sort of sweeping over the problems that small towns can have and the societal issues there, versus if you put it in a different type of book or a different type of genre, it might actually be prodding those societal issues in a completely different way, and that those small towns are the cause of those problems. But then you go to a Hallmark movie, and the reason why a lot of them have moved to the big city is because they cannot stand to be in their small town, and they've just come home and refound a love for it as older people, which is then another thing about ageism and societies and the different societies of generations, which is something we are talking about a lot. So I just think that there's layers to society that are really, I think Regis oversimplifies, to get back to Regis.
Yeah,
and
again though, I think it's because she was foundational. So there's nothing to build on. You have to put a brick down in order to start.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've thrown out so many ideas just discussing it today.
Yep.
That, like, you know, this podcast is
if I was listening to this, my head would be spinning. It would be doing your your wiggly brain that you talk about.
Brain. Yeah.
I would be doing that, listening to this, going, wait, what is society? What are they talking about?
Ideas, and there's just so much to talk about consistently. And just
lucky for you, we can talk a lot for a long time, for many episodes.
Yes, but that's the end of our pod for today.
Aw.
I know, that was a fun one.
And we wrapped that up really nicely.
Yeah, well done, Georgia.
Thank you.
Very good.
It's almost like I write for a living and I have to draw connections between things. Thank you all for joining us today. Next week, we are looking at the subgenre of bucket list romance.
Oh, topical, because someone has a book out about that at the moment.
Oh my God, wonder who it is.
Convenient she would be the one hosting that week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I'm about talking bucket lists a lot at the moment.
Yeah. So just a bit of industry insight for you guys next week. Thank you so much for joining us, and come back next week.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.